Hi everyone. In this lecture I'm going to talk about how to start an introduction to an argumentative research paper. So how do you get started? What is the sort of information that's supposed to go into your introduction? How do you put that all together? So for some people the hardest place to start on a paper is the beginning, when you're just looking at a blank page and trying to figure out what to do. The reason that's difficult is you're missing a step in the writing process. So before you get to actually writing the introduction, you want to go through the other step, which is pre-writing. So you want to make sure that you've submitted your essay topic choice and you've gotten feedback from me on how to write that more specifically, or if your topic is appropriate. And then second, you want to do some brainstorming. Write down everything you know about the topic, all the information that you have in your head. Write it all down in a journal entry or Google Doc or whatever. Or do some webbing to kind of put your mind in that state of thinking about the topic. You also want to start doing some research, right? So if you're looking into the problem, as I said in my lecture on research, open up a Wikipedia page and read the article out, or read some of the articles that are cited in the Wikipedia page. Potentially go on to EBSCO and see what kind of sources there are on it. Look around in some reliable magazines. Look around in major journalist magazines, the BBC, New York Times, etc., etc. So do some brainstorming, do some research, figure out as much about the topic as you possibly can. Come up with a hypothesis of what you think the solution to the problem is. Write all that down, and then start on the introduction. So if you have that information, you'll be in a much more comfortable place to work on the intro. Here's what you should probably have in it. I'll go through this step by step. The first sentence of your introduction, you want to be enticing to the reader. To make it that way, you want to use what's called a hook. So a hook is a interesting or exciting first line that's going to make the reader want to read more. You'll see this often in newspapers and magazines. And you'll see this in good essays as well. Here's a few examples of good hooks. One, what stereotype comes to mind when people think of the topic? What do they associate with the problem? So a student in class was talking about gun control. Well, as horrific as it is, people often think of mass shootings or school shootings when they think of issues associated with gun violence and problems with controlling who has guns and who uses them. Someone that was writing about NASA, about whether we should fund NASA or not. People often think about either that NASA is sort of a waste of money, right? That we spend too much money on it, or they think that NASA exponentially makes us money because all the things they invent provide a whole bunch of resources, okay? So whatever the stereotype is, you might start with that. What do people think of? If you're hanging out with your friends and they ask, what are you going to write your paper on? And you say, oh, I'm going to do it on cheating in esports. What do they think of? What game do they associate that with? What player do they associate that with? What scandal? Start there. It's an easy place for most readers to identify with. Secondly, if you've done some research and you found a surprising statistic, and it's something that you think most readers won't know about, use that as a hook. Here's an interesting example from the NASA. Most Americans believe that our budget for NASA is something like 10 to 20% of the total federal budget, when in fact, it's less than 1%. It's tiny. During the height of NASA's funding, right before the moon landing in the 1960s, it was up to 4 or 5% of the national budget. So that could be a statistic that you could post to say, maybe we're not funding this enough. Maybe it's too small of a percent. There could be other statistics. I'm sure there's statistics about gun violence, about all sorts of topics that people are writing about. So if you find one, that can be a good one. A third one is an interesting anecdote or a moving anecdote. So if you know someone that has dealt with the problem that you're writing about, or you know someone that is involved with it somehow, you can mention that in your book. You could even write about yourself, potentially, and say how you've dealt with the problem and this is what's motivated you to find a solution. So those are all good hooks. Usually they take one line, it could take a couple of lines, it just depends on what it is. Okay, so once you have a hook, the next part is to answer the question, what is it? What is the problem? What are the parameters of it? So usually you want to have a definition. So, what is the problem associated with gun violence? Are we talking about what type of it? What's the problem with, not funding a space program? Or what are the problems with, achieving these goals? So tell us what your topic is, give us the parameters of what the topic is, which could take a sentence, and then tell us exactly what it is or how it's defined. And you might find a definition for this in a source somewhere. So it might tell you exactly what the problem is. After that, you want to explain when did this problem start? Right? Give us a context for when it began, when it ended. Because some of these social problems are new, right? Esports has only existed for 10, 15, maybe 20 years, maybe a little longer. So the problem is a new one. Gun violence has been with us forever, but not forever. Obviously, firearms were only really invented coming to widespread use in the last couple of years. But you might be talking about specific periods of time. So give us a context of when did it start, what period of time are you talking about. The next thing is, tell the reader how big of a problem is it. You're also going to need sources here. So, how many people are impacted by this problem? What are the various ways that it impacts people's lives? Give us all that information. Explain all the ins and outs of the problem and exactly how big or small it is. Give us context. Okay, so depending on your topic, depending on the length of your quotations and sources, that might take up a full paragraph. It's something like half a page, 3/4 of a page. Because you want to integrate quotes, you want to put in parenthetical documentation, you're going to have a heading. The next question to answer is going to be giving context to the problem. So tell us, now that we know what the problem is, when it started, how big of a problem it is, tell us what solutions are being debated. What are the two sides of the debate? So why is the problem not solved? So what are the solutions on one side? What are the solutions on the other side? Or if really it's sort of a one-sided debate, why is the problem not being solved? What's preventing the appropriate solutions from being implemented? So maybe this problem has a very logical, rational solution, but it's not being implemented because people aren't doing the research. They're not thinking about it clearly. Whatever. It depends on what the problem is. So, what are the two sides? What are the potential solutions? Once you have that, you want to write in what your solution is. So tell us which side you're agreeing with and what your potential solutions are. So I'm not going to write all this out because it's going to take too much time, but this is how I might do this if I was writing about video game addiction. So for my hook, I would probably go with a stereotype. So I would probably write a sentence or two about the first thing that comes to people's minds, many people, when they think about video game addiction, is teenagers or young people losing friendships or cutting themselves off from their family or failing out of school because they're playing games so much, or young people being hospitalized or dying from playing video games for too long. So that's where I might start with. And I might need a source to back that up because this has happened. I don't know specifically where or how. If I wanted to find one, I'd have to look it up, cite the source, either put in a parenthetical citation or maybe a quote. Okay, so if I use that as my hook, the next part is what is it? So I can tell the reader, okay, video game addiction is playing video games too much. So it cuts off your ability to have friends, interact with your family, go to work, go to school, etc., etc. But it would also be good to have a definition. So are there psychological textbooks that define it? Are there psychiatrists or experts that define it? I might take a quote from them. When did it start? Try to put this into context, right? Video games have only existed for 30 or 40 years, so it's only existed as a problem for that period of time. Probably has really only existed as a problem for like the last 15 or 20 years at most, as video games have gotten more and worse. The next part, how big of a problem is it? Well, again, I have to find a source and figure out, is this a tiny percentage of people? Is this 20, 30 million people? Who knows? So find a source, cite that. The next part, in potentially the same paragraph, maybe in a new paragraph, is what solutions are being debated? What's the context of this? And for video game addiction, it really is sort of a debate about, is it a specific new type of addiction, or is it part of other addictions? Is video game addiction really just a gambling addiction? Is it really just part of this sort of pleasure feedback loop that shows up when you're given a sort of task or puzzle to fix, and then when you fix it, you get a feedback from the game saying you did good, and it boosts your serotonin levels. So figuring out, is this a matter of definition? And then, talking about what are the solutions to this? Why is it not being solved? Once you've done that, you might come up with a three-part thesis. And I think for me, if I was going to come up with a three-part thesis for video game addiction, it would be something like this. So here's my 10 to 3-point thesis. The way to solve or reduce the prevalence of video game addiction is to increase the education of students about it in primary and high school. There's 1 point. Educate parents and educators in those same levels about how to deal with it. That's point 2. And provide more affordable psychiatric care for those who want or need help. That's point 3. As I'm working on this paper and doing research, I may find that some of those solutions are not possible. Maybe the funding isn't there, or education's just not going to do it. I don't know. But if they do turn out to be correct, then each one of those is going to become a body paragraph, and that's what I'm going to talk about in the next lecture. So if you can go through each of these steps about building a hook, answering what is it, answering when did it start, how big of a problem it is, giving context to the problem, giving a definition of the problem, and then at the end of that, you should be able to potentially come up with a 3-part thesis. So that should get you started on writing an introduction. And the thesis is going to be the cornerstone of your paper. So sometimes, if you get stuck on the introduction, what I suggest is trying to come up with a thesis to build the rest of the paper around. Because you'll notice that in this thesis, if we get rid of all this, Okay? So let's say I delete all this and you read this, and you don't know anything about the topic. You might say, okay, well, what is video game addiction? And why is it a problem? So the thesis can help you figure out, well, what questions do I need to answer for the reader before they can understand my thesis. So that's what the intro does. So if you get stuck, potentially try to write your thesis first and then backtrack into the introduction. Okay, that's it. I'll come back with more examples and more details on that in the next lecture, and then I'll start getting into writing body paragraphs and